Is that it, Dad?
That's it, Tommy. Isn't she a giant? 4 miles. Space for 10,000 wagons covers a pretty big area. Here we go, down the ramp.
City of Fire. The 3rd episode to enter production, the 17th to be finished, and the 15th to be broadcast. Started in 1964, finished in 1965, transmitted in 1966. This is the story of how international rescue saved the world's most annoying family from disaster, first in 25 minutes, then in 50 minutes. It was one of the earliest episodes into production, but one of the last of the 1964 half-hours to be expanded. This week, with the help of a partly complete copy of a half-hour script and previously unseen material, we'll be showing for the first time how City of Fire was originally intended to run. It's December 1964, and Gerry Anderson has taken the first episode of Thunderbirds to show Lou Grade, and... Yes? Hello? I see. This isn't a feature film. It's a YouTube short. You want the running time cut by half? He says we've explained all of this before. Get on with it. Alright, well that's fine. This is complicated enough to explain as it is. City of Fire, written by Alan Fennell and directed by David Elliott, on Stage 2 at AP Films under the supervision of Mary Turner. This entered production in the autumn of 1964 and, as originally scripted, ran something like this. The story so far. The Thompson Tower is revealed to the world and the audience on its opening day by a news reporter. At the same time, the Carter family are en route to visit the tower, and after a brief encounter with a dangerous driver, they park the car and wander off into the lengthy tunnels that connect the car park with the building. Meanwhile, after a brief police encounter, the dangerous driver and her husband make their way into the car park, but at full speed. They crash into other cars, cause an explosion, but manage to escape, even though they were catapulted to their doom. In central control, the controller orders the closure of various corridors to contain the fire, but the world's most annoying family have decided to play cops and robbers in an area marked off limits and are out of view of the cameras. Despite valiant attempts, the fire is raging out of control as the vent covers won't close. Suddenly, the controller and his assistant spot the world's most annoying family and inexplicably decide they need to be saved. Above the Earth on Thunderbird 5, John receives the call for help, and we go to an advert break.
Don't forget the fruit gums, Mum.
John radios into base, and Thunderbird 1 and then Thunderbird 2 are dispatched to the danger zone. Thunderbirds 1 and 2 arrive, and, using the mole, they tunnel into the subterranean corridors and then cut through each of the containment doors with their regular oxyacetylene gear. It's a race against time to see if the family get what they deserve, but sadly, international rescue get to them in time. The episode ends as we see our favourite couple on their way to cause another $25,000 million worth of damage. Well, we might have cut some of that, but the gist of the plot is correct. Of the original 1964 25-minuters, Pitter Peril, City of Fire, Sun Probe, The Uninvited, The Mighty Atom, Vault of Death, Operation Crash Dive, and Move and You're Dead, City of Fire was the penultimate to be expanded. The two 1965 half-hours, Martian Invasion and Brink of Disaster, were completed the following year in 1966. Recently, we looked at Pitter Peril, the first of the expanded 25-minuters, and saw the problems that had caused Gerry Anderson and his editing team. However, by this time, several months later, APF had got much cleverer about their expansions. So clever that this week the task of breaking down the alterations will be far more complicated than with other episodes so far in this series. City of Fire includes not just additional scenes, but reshot scenes, expanded scenes, and even dubbed scenes. And certain scenes from the 1964 script were reordered for the final episode. Now, before we begin a detailed breakdown of the plot, we'd like to engage in a little bit of speculation about how the original format of Thunderbirds was intended to run. An interesting feature of the 25-minute City of Fire script is that international rescue do not feature until the first advert break. In Vault of Death, although they appear briefly earlier on, the first call for help is also at the first advert break. In Trapped in the Sky, we're halfway into the episode before international rescue set off, and in the original unbroadcast hour version of Pitter Peril, it's also at the halfway point that Jeff and the boys come in. So it may be possible that an early intention of the series was to spend the first 12 minutes or so setting up the guest characters, and then the second 12 minutes with the heroes saving the day. This may explain why, when it came to Pitter Peril, the first of the expanded half-hours, this structure was initially maintained, saving international rescue until halfway in. Except now, it's not 12 minutes they're away, but 24, and so the episode was recut close to broadcast to bring them in sooner. This time, though, with City of Fire, the audience is not left waiting for half an hour, but gets to the heroes much sooner. With the exception of the Mighty Atom, where International Rescue are still tardy in making their first appearance, it would seem that the idea of giving half an episode to the guest characters was quietly dropped. Until Thunderbirds Are Go, anyway. And, if indeed we're right, it's only speculation, which we shall end now. The surviving script for City of Fire comprises of 17 pages out of a script that probably ran to about 35 pages. The beginning and end are missing, but the majority of the middle is there, and it's enough to show us how the episode was originally intended to look. Now, the opening of the episode is probably as it was originally scripted. At the approximate 4-minute mark, we should have gone straight to the Carter family, driving down the motorway, seemingly as refugees from Stingray, and encountering the husband and woman, as they are labelled in the script. However, in the transmitted version, we join International Rescue for a new and clever plot addition. Trials of a new gas to improve the speed of their cutting equipment. The gas causes the operators to pass out, that adding a level of tension to the rescue sequences later on.
Virgil, what's wrong? Are you all right? Virgil, answer me. Are you okay? Scott, can you hear me?
As originally scripted, the rescue was merely a race against time with ordinary oxyacetylene cutting gear. Now this has a knock-on effect down the plot, as we will show shortly. At approximately 8 minutes, the Carters join the plot some 4 minutes later than originally intended. And from this point, the plot runs as originally intended for approximately 5 minutes. And then it becomes a little more complicated. After scene 52, in which the controller says,
Corridor 812, clear. A12, sealed.
we should then return to the Carter family. However, we then go through the first of additional shots of fire tenders, the majority of which were added in 1965, then return to the control centre, skipping scene 53 with the Carters, and going to scene 54, where Controller 2 now shuts down Corridor C14.
C14 sealed.
So amazed is he by this news that Controller 1 switches from being Matt Zimmerman to Ray Barrett for one line, and begins a previously unscripted obsession with fire tenders.
How are those fire tenders coming?
Have those fire tenders standing by, just in case. Alert, fire tenders, and get to work on that vent cover. Get those fire tenders clear.
Why the character suddenly speaks with Ray Barrett's voice is unclear. As with Vault of Death, though, where the same thing occurs, it seems to be a production error unrelated to the expansion. Separately, given the amount of dialogue across multiple characters, this would seem to be Matt Zimmerman's first episode. After further shots of the emergency services, and further chat about them by Controller 1, who incidentally has shifted the frog in his throat and has returned to being Matt Zimmerman,
It's vital that we don't scare anyone. And if we're lucky, we won't need the tenders.
we finally go back to Tommy Carter, who has decided to play hide-and-seek in an area clearly marked off-limits. The episode then plays as scripted again until...
Don't make a move. We've got you covered. The place is surrounded.
The action should break here for some more exciting corridor door closing, but the sequence is played out until...
Okay, I'll come quietly.
Here, the scene should have continued until the Carters discover that Darwinism has come into play and that they're going to suffer for their stupidity.
That end's closed, too.
Joe, we're shut in here.
What's going on around here?
But instead, we get to see Corridor D50 close.
Corridor D50 sealed.
Once that bit of excitement is out of the way, we then get to see the Carters realise that all is not well. Now, page 12 of the script is missing, so it's difficult to say for certain what was there originally. But judging by the dodgy lip sync and Controller 1's fire tender fixation, it would seem that this is 1964 footage that has been redubbed. When the script restarts one page later, the scene starts as transmitted, at which point Controller 1 should have ordered the evacuation of the building with a tannoy announcement. Instead, he continues to have firemen on the brain and orders them in to fight the fire. Though what they were ordered to do until now isn't made clear, as the fire has been raging for ages by this point. After yet more fire tenders, we go back to the Carters. Bar an advert break, the action plays out pretty much as originally scripted in 1964, all the way to Tracy Island, which as originally planned was its first appearance. After the obligatory shot of the island, we should have gone directly to Alan asking,
How's the water, Tintin?
but in the hour version, the scene has been extended by having Alan chat with Scott and Virgil about the new gas, which, of course, wasn't in the half-hour version.
The funny thing is, I feel better than normal.
Yeah, me too. Let's hope Brains irons out the snags. That new cutting power will be useful.
Not if it's going to knock you out each time you use it. Say, Tintin is sure enjoying herself.
Alan then goes to join Tintin. Here it seems that 1965 Alan is having a chat with 1964 Tintin.
Reckon you're in the best place. Boy, is it hot today. How's the water, Tintin?
Just great, Alan. Why don't you come in? It's so cool.
Also, as a quick observation, it seems that these swimming pool scenes were shot alongside similar scenes for Vault of Death, as Scott, Alan and Virgil are wearing the same clothes. Although Scott and Virgil have changed position, Virgil seems to be nursing the same glass in the same hand. Then off we go to Thunderbird 5. Now this scene plays largely as written, although it seems that the scripted futuristic suitcase was dispensed with before shooting, and the 1964 footage seems to run all the way up to John going to the tape deck. In the original version, he would have heard the call for help, and we would have gone to a commercial break.
Don't forget the fruit gums, Mum.
But here, he responds to the call and gets more information, which the controller obligingly offers.
It's simple. We can't put the fire out, and what's even worse, there are 3 people trapped below ground.
Okay, we'll get help to you as quickly as possible.
We don't head back to 1964 until we return to Tracy Island and John radios in. At this point, it's worth noting that the video phone on Jeff's desk faces inwards in 64, but outwards in 65. And, I hope you're still following me. After 1964 Jeff, we then cut to 1965 Scott, Alan and Virgil, before returning back to the controllers.
I wonder how they're doing in that corridor. That's the last place I'd want to be trapped in a fire.
When we return to Tracy Island, we're back in 1965, and Jeff becomes increasingly erratic. First he tells Scott that they won't know all the details until Scott investigates. Fine, off Scott trots. But then we return to the 1964 25-minute version, where Jeff asks the controllers for all the information they have, which was fine, because in the 1964 version, they hadn't already told John, which is something they do in the 1965 version. This is one of a few collisions between the 1964 and 1965 plots. Anyway, the 1964 plot then continues. Although originally we were supposed to see the full Thunderbird 2 launch. We don't return to 1965 until Scott asks Virgil about cutting down arrival time. Once again, the appearing and disappearing horizontal flight control symbol gives a hint as to what was shot in which year. The same can be said of the enormous rocket planted under Thunderbird 1 when it lands. The special effects department got much subtler with the technique later on, but not soon enough to help the 2 occupants of the cars, which have been burnt to a crisp here. Page 22 of the script is missing, so it's difficult to know what happened at this point. So we'll just mention the fantastic shot of the fire tenders leaving the scene, and the fact that the shot is well off the edge of the set, complete with studio ladder in sight. Other slips into reality in the episode include a G-clamp coming through the ceiling, and the literally fourth wall breaking removal of a panel of Thunderbird 5 to let the camera round. And if it seems uncharitable to point these out, well, we'll just say they started it when they left the reflection of the studio wall and lamps in the grill of Fab 1, and then put it in the end titles. When we join Scott in the control tower, he's helpfully brought mobile control with him, and just as in Terror in New York City, we can separate the 1964 footage from the 1965 footage thanks to the microphones. Gold mic 25 minutes, silver mic 50 minutes. In the transmitted version, we cut away from the scene before Virgil has a chance to radio in to see the Carter family suffer a bit more before the ad break. After which we then return to the control tower and Virgil gets a chance for his lines.
Thunderbird 1 control from Thunderbird 2. Approaching danger zone.
At this point, you must be feeling a bit overwhelmed. There's so much information to take in. It's all been very stressful. So please take this moment to relax. You can picture clouds. The clouds are starting to move. Breathe in, breathe out. All is well. Right, awake now? Good, let's get on with it. In the transmitted version, when we return from the advert break, we enter a weird hybrid scene. The footage is shot in 1965, but contains dialogue from 1964 and 1965. The original scene ran like this.
The tower's down. It's sure going to make our job tougher.
What's happening?
Sounds like the whole world's caving in.
And it's got much harder, Joe. Joe, what are we gonna do?
But in 1965, it became this. Listen out for the change in performance by Shane Rimmer to introduce the new plot point, which Scott explains very clearly to Virgil.
Be with you in 5 minutes.
FIB, Virgil. The tower's down. It's sure going to make our job tougher. Now, listen carefully, Virgil. By the looks of things, we're going to have to cut through a whole heap of steel fire doors.
Very, very clearly. But Virgil too is struck by rewrite amnesia later when, thanks to a leftover piece of dialogue from 1964, he asks,
Why the cutting gear, Scott?
The new plot point then carries into a new Tracy Island scene where Jeff, so happy about the demise of the world's most annoying family, has decided to sport his lovely smile ahead, until he realises that Brain's invention can actually help. Then he gets all frowny. The script runs out on page 24, 7 minutes or so before the end of the half-hour version, and 20 minutes before the end of the 50-minute version. But it does run out on a helpful bit of dialogue, which tells us a lot about what happened next. In the 1965 version, after Thunderbird 2 lands, Scott outlines his plan, including the use of the Firefly.
Okay, Scott. What's the action?
Now listen, Virgil. We're going to have to drill down to the corridor system in the mall. That's the closest we can get to the folks in corridor C-17. But first, we'll have to clear the west section of that burning rubble.
That's where we start drilling, is it?
Oh, that's right. Now, there's a lot of soft rock there, so you'd better get that Firefly out of the pod and start clearing.
But in the original script, the dialogue runs like this.
Okay, Scott. Any revision to equipment?
No, just the mole and oxyacetylene cutting gear, Virgil. There's no easy way out of this. It's going to be a long, dangerous job.
This confirms a couple of things for us. One, that the original intention was to use ordinary oxyacetylene, and two, that the Firefly didn't appear, which means that this great vehicle's 2 appearances in the series were both included merely to bolster the running time. It's at this point that we have something of a confession to make. 2 episodes ago, in the Thunderbirds Unseen for Pitter Peril, we speculated that the mole hadn't originally appeared in the 1964 half-hour version of the episode, and that its original intended first appearance was to be in City of Fire. This was based on a number of reasons, but partly because the film strips from the Michael Wilson collection didn't contain any shots of the mole. Between that episode and this one, however, further strips have since surfaced, proving categorically that we were wrong, and that the mole's first appearance was in the original 1964 version of Pitter Peril. Most of what follows during the Firefly sequences was added in 1965, save perhaps a shot of Controller 1 who has a dubbed line, without actually speaking.
I've got a fast car ready for you outside.
Whether this was a failure of the lip-sync mechanism or a desperate bit of footage reuse is unknown, but it wouldn't be the last time a character would say a line without moving its mouth.
You can say that again.
In order to accommodate the Firefly, the pod scenes had to be reshot. Here's how it looked in the final 1965 episode, but here, seen for the first time, is a shot from the original 1964 episode. Once the mole begins drilling, we then largely rejoin the 1964 plot. All references to the new gas are dubbed over 1964 footage.
How do you feel?
Fine, but that doesn't mean a thing. We were okay last time.
Fortunately, the earlier decision to put the characters in masks that covered their mouths gave the editors freedom to change the intent of the scene with ease. Although we don't have the end of the 25-minute script, it would seem logical that the family are saved in the same way as the transmitted version.
Come on, Virgil, here they are.
And that the final comedy scene of the oblivious husband and wife ended the episode. The controller's lack of faith that Scott and Virgil have survived, though, is from 1965.
Those international rescue guys tried, but it was impossible. They died helping others.
But back to 1964 for his sigh of relief that international rescue exist.
What an organization. No one knows where they come from, but thank heavens they come.
Even if they do have to be briefed twice. The Tracy Lounge scene that winds down the episode ends on a mix of 1965 and original 1964 footage. The first part of the scene, in which the success of the new gas is discussed, is from 1965, until Tintin starts reading the news out, at which point she gets a new paper, and Jeff suddenly changes position. Before we move on, though, there are 2 other interesting points in relation to the 25-minute script. Firstly, it refers to Thunderbirds 1 and 2. This is curious because it was found with the remains of script from Sunprobe, Vault of Death, and Move and You're Dead. However, Sunprobe, Episode 4, and Move and You're Dead, Episode 9, both refer to Rescues 1 and 2. 5 is always referred to as the space station. This makes it slightly obscure as to how early on the name of the series was changed from International Rescue to Thunderbirds. Another interesting point is that in the script, when John radios in, it states specifically, TV picture of John replaces portrait's face. This is in reference to the abandoned technique which we recently found footage of in Trapped in the Sky. Oddly though, none of the portraits here show signs of having been cut out, indicating that they may have been refilmed much later. The cut-out face portraits remain visible in the series until as late as Move and You're Dead, although the technique was abandoned completely before broadcast. Once the episode was finished, Barry Gray viewed the episode to write his timing notes. After viewing an episode and meticulously noting the action reel by reel, Barry Gray would either go away and write an original score for the episode, or he would prepare edited tapes from tracks written for other episodes. However, his suggestions were not always used in the final edit, such as this 3M3, which Gray intended to accompany Thunderbird 1 taking up its launch position. City of Fire didn't have its own score. Instead, it relied upon re-edited cues from other episodes, and indeed other series. It did have one small section written for it when the husband and wife drive down into the car park. This was part of a library session recorded in 1965 for various episodes.
1M7. 3, 4, 5, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5.
In Barry Gray's timing notes, when he draws upon a cue from Supercar, he charmingly mistakenly refers to Tommy as Jimmy, confusing one annoying kid with another. And while we're on the subject of Supercar, have you ever considered that Jimmy Gibson and Mitch are voiced by Sylvia Anderson and David Graham? What you're actually listening to is Lady Penelope and Parker talking to each other.
Hey, where's Mitch?
No, you hadn't. City of Fire was broadcast on December 6, 1966, just a few weeks after it had been completed. AP Films had made their September launch date in spite of the extra work, but were now struggling to complete the first series in time to keep it on air without interruption. Just 1 week after broadcast, viewers were treated to glimpses of behind the scenes of City of Fire when ATV Today ran a piece about the studios. There we can see Scott and Virgil cutting through the test store, complete with their lighting stand-ins, and a sign saying retakes. We can also see how many episodes were in production simultaneously, with sets, props, scenes, and bits of dialogue seen and heard from City of Fire, Cry Wolf, Security Hazard, The Cham Cham, and Man from MI5. Another behind-the-scenes film, shot roughly at the same time, shows Man from MI5, Attack of the Alligators, and The Dutch's Assignment in production. 7 episodes in total. City of Fire illustrates the great lengths AP Films went to in order to expand the early stories so as to maintain the excitement through 50 minutes. Interestingly, though, the more surgical approach of working in scenes throughout the episode doesn't perhaps work as well as with other stories, where a new opening subplot has been bolted on entirely. However, City of Fire remains a well-remembered story, with the striking visual of the tower's demise lingering in the memory long after broadcast. And talking of demise, if you'll allow us one indulgence, here's how we'd have reworked the episode.
Calling International Rescue. Calling International Rescue. This is Thompson Tower. Do you read me?
Next time, we'll be looking at The Uninvited and how the additional running time turned a potentially run-of-the-mill Stingray adventure into a firm fan favourite.